Every inspection body I have worked with has the same fear, that they have not written enough. And almost every one of them has written far too much. So today we are going to do something useful. I went through the published 3rd edition and pulled out every place it says you shall have a procedure. In every place it says you shall retain records. That is your actual mandatory list. Everything beyond it is your choice, and I will show you the clause that gives you that freedom. One quick thing before we start, and then I will leave you alone about it. Everything I am about to walk you through, we have already built for you. There is the full ISO IEC 17020 2026 edition documentation kit, 3 separate checklists, one for implementation, one for your internal audit, and one for the accreditation audit itself, and a complete online training course if you want to go deeper than a video can take you. All the links are in the description below this video. Right? Now let's get into it. Before the list, the clause that gives you permission to stop writing. Clause 5.3.1d says, the inspection body shall document its procedures to the extent necessary to ensure the consistent application of its inspection activities and the validity of the results to the extent necessary. That is a judgment you are allowed to make. In Clause 8.3.4 says all documentation, processes, systems, and records shall be included in or referenced from the management system. Referenced from. You do not have to rewrite your equipment manuals inside your quality manual. There is no required manual in this standard. No required document hierarchy. No page count. No assessor has ever written a nonconformity for having too few documents that worked. Plenty have written one for a beautiful system nobody follows. Here is the list. 9 places where the standard uses the words procedure or documented process. 6.1.2, a documented process for managing the competence of personnel. 6.2.5, a procedure for handling, transport, storage, use, and planned maintenance of equipment. 6.2.10, documented procedures for dealing with defective equipment. 7.1.1, a procedure for the review of requests, tenders, and contracts. 7.3.3, documented procedures to avoid deterioration or damage to items. 7.7.1, a documented procedure for handling appeals. 7.8.1, a documented procedure for handling complaints, and yes, that is separate from appeals. 8.5.1, a procedure for identification and management of nonconformities, and 8.3.1, procedures for the control of documents. 9, that is the mandatory set. Then there are things the standard requires in writing without using the word procedure, and they get missed for exactly that reason. 6.2.2, rules for access to and use of specified facilities and equipment. 6.1.5, a monitoring program, not just monitoring, a program with a defined frequency. 5.2.5, documentation describing the contractual conditions under which you provide inspection, and if you inspect for the legal entity you are part of, internal agreements instead. 5.3.5, documented duties, responsibilities, and authorities for each function involved in inspection activities, in a job description, or other documentation. And 8.2.1, documented policies and objectives, which 8.2.2 says must address competence, impartiality, and consistent operation. Those 3 words specifically. Now records, and this is where assessments are actually won or lost, because records are what an assessor samples. 7.1.5, records of contract review including significant changes. 7.2.6, records of validation for non-standard methods, and remember anything you or your client developed or any modification of a standard method is non-standard. 6.1.9, documented information demonstrating competence. 6.2.11, relevant information on equipment including software, identification, calibration, and maintenance. Clause 7.4, your inspection observations and data, recorded in a timely manner, with amendments traceable to previous versions and both retained. 8.5.5. The nature of nonconformities, causes, actions taken, and the effectiveness of corrective action. 8.6.2g. Evidence of the audit program and audit results, and the inputs and outputs of management review. Document control. Clause 8.3.1 gives 7 rules, and they are worth reading literally because they are easy to half implement. Documents approved for adequacy before issue by authorized personnel. Periodically reviewed and updated as necessary. Changes in current revision status identified. Relevant versions available at points of use, with distribution controlled. Uniquely identified. External documents identified and their distribution controlled. And obsolete documents prevented from unintended use, with suitable identification if you keep them. That sixth one, external documents, is the one bodies forget. The standards and schemes you inspect against are external documents. If your inspectors are working from a superseded version of an inspection standard because nobody controlled its distribution, that is a serious finding, and it casts doubt on every inspection performed against it. Records control, clause 8.3.2, lists 8 controls: identification, storage, protection, backup, archive, retrieval, retaining, and disposal. Backup is in that list explicitly, which matters more than it used to now that most inspection records are born digital. 8.3.3 sets retention by reference to your contractual obligations, not to a fixed number of years. So the answer to how long do we keep records is read your contracts and any scheme or regulatory requirement that applies, then write it down. That same clause requires access to be consistent with your confidentiality commitments and the records to be readily available. Those two pull in opposite directions, and resolving that tension deliberately is what a good records policy does. And 8.3.5, personnel must have access to the documented information applicable to their responsibilities. An inspector who cannot reach the current method in the field is a finding waiting to happen. And what is genuinely new in documentation terms in this edition? Clause 7.5.1, the system you use to collect, process, record, report, store, or retrieve inspection data shall be validated. And whenever there are changes, including software configuration or modifications to commercial off-the-shelf software, they shall be authorized, documented, and validated before implementation. That is a change control record that most bodies have never kept. 7.5.2c is easy to miss. Your records shall include information on system failures and the appropriate immediate and corrective actions. So an IT incident log, tied to your corrective action process. Clause 8.4 brings risks and opportunities in, but read its note carefully. There is no requirement for formal methods for risk management or a documented risk management process. You are free to keep this proportionate, and 6.2.9b requires procedures for protecting the integrity and security of data where you use technology. And finally, the list nobody publishes. What you do not need. You do not need a quality manual. The standard never asks for one. If you want one as a navigation aid, fine, but it is your choice. You do not need a procedure per clause. 9 procedures are demanded. The rest is to the extent necessary. You do not need a documented risk management methodology. The note under 8.4.2 says so in plain words, and then says you can decide whether to develop a more extensive methodology. You do not need to own your facilities or equipment. The note under 6.2.1 is explicit that they can be borrowed, rented, hired, leased, or provided by another party. And you do not need to copy external documents into your system, because 8.3.4 allows you to reference them. Cut what you do not need. A smaller system that people actually follow beats a large one they route around. That is the real documentation load. 9 procedures, a defined set of records, 7 document control rules, and a great deal of freedom about everything else. If you would rather not draft all of it, the documentation kit is exactly this list, already written and editable. The implementation checklist tells you which requirement each document answers, and there are checklists for the internal audit and the accreditation audit. The training course goes through the clauses in depth. Links in the description. Tell me how many documents your system currently has. I would genuinely like to know how far above this list most bodies are sitting. Subscribe for the rest of the series.